What is up, guys? Marcellus Williams, aka TheSwolefessor, here to educate you on health, fitness, social well-being. And today, guys, I want to talk to you about why sometimes, in certain circumstances, you are a unique snowflake, whereas in other circumstances, you aren't. And the reason I'm doing this video, guys, is pretty much because in the fitness industry as a whole, there seems to be like two dogmatic views on the opposite end of the spectrum, right? The first one, which you guys know that I've done videos where I've gone against this before, is the ideal and belief that a lot of people hold that you like in every instance you're a unique snowflake. In every instance, everything you do needs to be, you know, individualized to you because of your genetics and because of your lifestyle and because of your goals, things like that, which certain aspects of that are true, right? But then there's a lot of aspects of that which are not true. But then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have the people who feel like, no, we're all humans in every aspect, everything we do needs to be the same as far as our training. Like everybody who's trying to build muscle needs to be trained the exact same way. Everybody who's trying to build strength needs to be training the exact same way, regardless of any differences with lifestyle, genetics, etc. right? And once again, certain aspects of that are true, but then there's a lot of this not true, right? Because there's like that happy middle. And the reason I'm like going into this aside from that, guys, also because in the future, as I'm doing more collaboration work with people that really are specific in certain aspects, right? Like when like I said, my friend David Shelton, who's very much into powerlifting, I'm gonna be talking to him about different stuff. When I do collaboration with Brendan, we're talking about things that may seem almost overly specific, right? In certain circumstances, it's because there is a time, guys, where you got to look at things from a general kind of standpoint, but there's also a time where you really do have to be specific, not only based upon your goals, but based upon things like how you're built, maybe your anthropometry or your morphology, or just your current lifestyle as far as maybe how much you're eating, how much sleep you're getting, things like that, right? Because there's a balance. And keep in mind, like there's a huge difference between somebody offering you something like, hey, this is custom programming based upon like, you know, your goals, kind of your lifestyle. There's a difference between that and then somebody trying to offer you custom programming on the basis of like, oh, well, according to everything with your genetics and your DNA, I think this is going to be the best. There's a huge difference, right? And then at the same time, there's those people who will try to sell everybody the same cookie cutter nonsense, right? Like, hey, this worked for me, so it's going to work for all of you, irregardless of the differences between each of you as individuals, right? So you want to avoid both of those dogmatic views. So let's pretty much get into it, right? So there's three things we want to look at when we're talking about things like this, right? The first thing are those general principles that do pretty much apply to everyone across the board, meaning like if we look at things like progressive overload, right? That's something that applies to everyone across the board. Assuming you were keeping it 100% natural, if you were trying to get bigger or stronger, you have to progressively overload. Once again, meaning that we're simply increasing that total workload that we're doing over time, meaning increasing that total volume in some way or another, right? Whether it's through sets, reps, or weight, we have to progressively overload. In order to see progression, you have to progressively overload, right? That's something that applies to all of us across the board because it's something that applies to human physiology. So if you're a human, it applies to you. Things like calories in versus calories out, even though yes, there's different ways to go about getting into a deficit and there's different eating habits you can do to get into a surplus. The reality is, if you're trying to lose weight over a long period of time, you need to be in a caloric deficit. If you're trying to gain weight, trying to build mass, trying to build size over a long period of time, you have to be in a caloric surplus, right? These are things that simply apply to human physiology. It's a simple energy equation. That's it, right? Then we have things like when we're looking at the second area, which is things that are more specific, things that are more individualized based upon you. Not even just your goals, but literally it could be based upon just your genetics or how you're built. Things that are completely outside of your control, right? And a good example of that I like to use are like dips, right? It's very dogmatic if you're somebody who says everybody should do dips, for the mere fact that there are certain individuals who cannot perform dips. It's not even so much that they can't perform them, but they can't perform them without feeling pain in their sternum or in some cases their rib cage. And that's simply due to how they're built. Due to their morphology, their anthropometry, they should not be doing this because it's gonna cause damage to their sternum. So even though it's a great movement, and even though, you know, maybe out of like a room of 100 people, 99 people can perform the movement with no problem, you may be that one person who can't perform the movement. And I'm not talking about people where they're using improper form and stuff like that, but if you know that you're doing everything right as far as your form and you're still feeling pain, then you simply may not be built for the movement. That's one of those cases where it is very much dependent upon you as an individual. Another example of that would be something as simple as like our squat stance, right? There's so many people who try to say that everybody's squat should look the same as far as how close or how far apart your feet are, how abducted your toes are, how far down your elbows are, or how far back they are, right? When the reality is that's simply not the case, guys. We're all built a little bit differently. Some of us have longer legs, shorter legs. We have different built hips. So due to that, it's gonna look different. board, if we look at like the top level squatters, you'll see how different a lot of their squats look. Some people have a closer stance, some people are somewhere in the middle, some people are very wide, some people have their toes fairly straight, some people are a little bit abducted, some are very abducted. So this idea that everyone's squat's gonna look the same simply isn't true. We may use a lot of the same cues, like, you know, chest up, back tight, but what the squat looks like as far as overall setup and stance is gonna very much depend upon the individual. So that's another example of things that really are specific to you. In that case, you would be a unique snowflake, because what you're doing isn't gonna be based off what anybody else is doing. It has to be based upon what's most comfortable for you as far as getting into position, right? And then the vast majority of things fall into the third area, and that's gonna be where, hey, these are general principles that do apply to everyone across the board, but how they apply and to what degree is going to depend upon you as an individual. And when I say that, I'm not just talking about like your genetics, I'm talking about like your goals, your lifestyle, a lot of that stuff, right? Because like I said, the idea that like, hey, oh, you're trying to like gain weight, okay, then just like everyone needs to be in a surplus of 3,500 calories. That doesn't work, right? So, and that's the example I want to use with this. So when we're talking about these, this middle area, right? So basic principles, once again, let's use calories in versus calories out, because that is a general principle that applies to everyone, right? But to what degree is gonna depend on you. If we're talking about, hey, you need to be in a deficit to lose weight, that's true, but to what degree is gonna vary. For you, maybe you need to be, you know, eating under 2,500 calories to be in a deficit. For me, maybe I can have a little bit more than that. Maybe I just need to be under 3,000 calories to be in a deficit. So once again, that's gonna depend on various factors. One thing partly is, yes, of course, you know, just your genetics as far as like, you know, naturally maybe how much you're walking around at weight-wise, how tall you are, your metabolism to a certain degree, yes, but then there's also lifestyle factors that come in, right? Like even if we have two people that have very similar genetics, right? Very similar RMRs and everything like that, if we have one individual who's, you know, working an 8 to 5 and they are sedentary, it's an office job. And then we have another individual working 8 to 5, but it's manual labor. They're constantly on their feet, walking, moving things around. Then even if they're on the same workout program, even if outside of their jobs, they get like the same amount of sleep, they like to eat the same types of foods, similar genetics, all that kind of stuff. The reality is, the person who's working the manual job is gonna get away with eating more food and still being in a deficit than the person who's working the 8 to 5. For the mere fact that the person working 8 to 5 is being very sedentary for a lot of hours throughout the day, whereas the other individuals being more active outside of their workouts. So that's when, you know, you do have to look at your individual circumstances. And then, like I said, to a certain degree, genetics come into play with certain things. Even like how you eat to be in a deficit, right? Some people can work with certain diets, not because there's anything magical about it, but simply because it's just that eating pattern works best for them, right? Like if we think about like the hormones leptin and ghrelin, leptin suppresses appetite, ghrelin increases appetite. If you just genetically maybe have higher elevations of ghrelin and you just have a bigger appetite, then you may have to go about getting to your deficit a different way. Maybe you use an eating window, maybe you get on a certain diet just because you find it's easiest for you to eat a deficit in that diet. That's okay, as long as you're understanding that that diet isn't magical because it somehow negates the basic principles that apply to all of us, being calories in versus calories out. It simply helps you as an individual to fulfill that principle, to follow that principle, right? Another example would be something as simple as volume, right? We all, if there's no training volume, right, then there's no progression at all. Everyone has to be training with that minimum effective volume to see any type of results as far as like, you know, hypertrophy or even as far as strength, right? Like if there's no type of training volume, then you're not training, you're not gonna get stronger. But how much volume that is, once again, is going to be very dependent upon the individual. So it's a principle that applies to all of us, but to what degree depends on you. Some people just genetically, I'm talking even if they have the same job, they're on the same training routine, getting the same amount of sleep every night, some people just genetically have better work capacity and better recovery than somebody else. So they may be able to push a little bit more volume, whereas the other person may have to scale it back a little bit. Then on the other hand, even if people are very similar genetically, different things, once again, like your lifestyle choices and behaviors. If you're somebody where you're able to get, you know, 8-10 hours of sleep every night and you're able to like eat lots of food compared to somebody where maybe they're only getting like 4 to 5 hours of sleep a night, even though of course we know there's more that goes into it than just like, you know, how much you're sleeping. There's things like, you know, like actual true deep REM sleep, things like that. But I'll have a link in the description to my video over sleep in the description box down below so you guys can look at that if you're curious about that. But the point is, lifestyle factors go into it as well, right? If you're just not able to get as much sleep as you should be, or if you're not able to eat as much as you want to be, then your recovery may not be as well as somebody who is able to do that, even if you have very similar genetics and very similar recovery from a genetic standpoint, right? So those are things that we have to consider. So it's once again using critical thinking to kind of find this balance. That's the reason, guys, when I did my video over how to discern valid fitness information from BS. One of the main things I talked about was, okay, is the information you're getting going against a basic principle that we know applies to everyone? That's why it's important to learn those basic principles of human physiology and anatomy and biomechanics, physics, so that you understand that, okay, if it's going against these basic principles, these scientific facts, then I know it's garbage. But at the same time, you gotta be aware of these people who will try to like just generalize everything, or they'll take something where it does come down to the specific individual, but they'll try to take that thing that applies to one person and apply it to everyone. Like, oh, your deadlift should look like this. Everybody should be sitting way back. When based upon your build, based upon like, you know, your back angle, your hip height, how far bent over you are is gonna look different from person to person, right? So it's just important to understand, use critical thinking to look at, okay, in this specific instance of what I'm trying to do, like, does this general principle just apply to me in a general way? Do I need to apply the general principle in a more specific way? Or is this something where it really just comes down to me based upon my lifestyle, my build, things like that? Because it's not one or the other, guys. And that's the biggest problem I have with this industry, is that too often it's too much dogmatic, absolutist thinking. As I've said on this channel several times before, guys, being scientific doesn't mean being dogmatic. And once again, we can even look at things as far as, like I said, your psychology, right? Just because something's optimal on paper doesn't mean it's optimal for you. Even if I come up with the most optimal, quote unquote, programming on paper, if it's something that you can't work with just due to your lifestyle or just due to the fact that you don't enjoy it, then it's not gonna be optimal for you. The key is finding the most optimal, the most effective thing that you can do, right? It's as simple as that. Even if there's something that, hey, if you can manage to do this, it would be better than what you're doing now, but you know you're not able to do that, you're not able to be consistent, then it's better to go with the suboptimal, you know, option, so long as it's something that's still effective and is going to work, that you enjoy and can be consistent with. Now, I'm not talking about things that are just flat out not effective. That's another problem that I have. Like, there's certain things, guys, where it's like, okay, yeah, this is optimal for you, this is optimal for this person, but then there's some things, guys, that just aren't optimal, period, that aren't effective, period, that people have made up and tried to sell you on the basis of, like, you know, they just have good genetics and something they were doing that wasn't effective at all, but they were able to make gains in spite of doing that thing. Or maybe they're not natural, so they're gonna make gains regardless of what they're doing. So I'm not talking about stuff like that, but what I'm just talking about is understanding that you need to always be aware of, hey, is this something that applies to me for the mere fact that I'm a human being? Is this something that applies to me based upon my build? Or is this something that, like, applies just because of lifestyle choices that I'm currently making? Those are the things you want to look at and think about. So yeah, I just wanted to do this video and kind of get this idea out of the way, so that as I'm doing these future videos, you guys won't be confused when it's like, this seems like really overly specific. It doesn't seem like something I can apply to myself, because maybe it's not something that you can apply unless you're in that specific situation, like unless you are someone who's focused on powerlifting, versus some of the videos that you guys are already used to where it's more general stuff that does apply to everybody across the board. But yeah, just want to make that clear. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, go ahead and leave a comment down below, let me know what you did. If you're not, leave a comment down below, let me know what I can do to get better. Like the video, share, subscribe, keep it simple, specific, scientific. I'll catch y'all later.